Legendary saxophonist Frank Catalano has been lighting up stages across the world with his powerhouse performances and signature sound. With over 150 shows a year, from sold out venues to major festivals, Frank's influence in jazz and beyond is undeniable. Whether tearing through an electrifying solo at the Hollywood Bowl or crafting a top charting album, his impact on music spans generations and genres. Today, we dive into his incredible journey, collaborations with rock and jazz icons, and what keeps his passion for the saxophone burning. So, Frank, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Abe. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Frank, the way I discovered your music was quite some time ago. I'm talking about 2009, 2010. I went to grad school with a guitar player named Dean Anbar.
Oh, I love Dean. Yeah, he's my good friend. So
Yeah, so
it's
he had mentioned that he had played with you and that you guys were doing some shows together, and that kind of led me into discovering your work. So I'm glad you remember Dean. I didn't know you guys were good friends.
well, I guess I haven't seen him for a while now, but when he lived in Chicago, I heard him play and I needed a bass player to play with me at the Green Mill. And even though he's mostly a guitar player, someone's like, well, Dean's a good player. I think he could like figure it out. It was a last minute thing. And Dean's like, well, I'm really more of a guitar player. I'm like, okay, well, come back next week and I'll hire you for guitar. And I think he was going to DePaul University at the time where I graduated from. So this was quite some time ago. But I know I've had him play like with me and Randy Brecker in New York and other stuff and some shows in LA. So, that I haven't talked with him for a while, but yeah, we were hanging out pretty regularly for a long time.
Yeah, that's
He
great.
probably has years on him.
Yeah. So you're Midwestern, I guess you could say, right?
Well, I grew up in Chicago, and I'm in Chicago right now, and I've had a house here in Bucktown neighborhood for a long, long time. But about 10 years ago, my wife and I bought a condo in Greenwich Village. So I would consider myself at this point in time, around the time I got the residency at Birdland Jazz Club, probably being in New York as much as Chicago, and then we're constantly just touring and traveling. So I feel kind of like a nomad at this point, but so yeah, I would say part Chicago, part New York, and then at large, I suppose.
With the amount of work you do as a band leader, traveling and doing as many concerts as you do, you've had a long career so far already. I mean, and it's been, consistent, what's the secret to just maintaining that longevity to where you don't get burnt out? Because even going on the road for a week or even like 2 or 3 days is hard on the body. So do you have any secrets you could share? And this is the jazz world, so it's totally different too, that side of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I'll be 48 next week. Some places online saying I'm older than I am. Some say younger, but part of it was because when I was a teenager, I was playing regularly with Louis Bellson and also Tony Bennett, and I had to say that I was 21 or older for some of these things. So I actually, as a teenager, started having to say I was a tiny bit older. And but I can say at this point, getting ready to turn 48, I have had a recording career for 30 years now. I've been touring for over 30 years. So I can say this is the first time where I'm getting old enough to where it is a little stressful on the body, meaning you wake up and your back's going like, okay, I better, crack this thing and put the saxophone on. So I would say my 20s and 30s, no matter how many gigs I did in a year, and no matter if it was a five-star hotel or if it was sleeping on somebody's couch, I didn't have any problems. I would say now, as I am getting a little older, I definitely kind of need the accommodations to be pretty happening just because the days of sleeping on the couch or something are kind of done if I want to be able to do 200 and something shows a year, I feel. But I definitely feel like I just love playing so much. I'm excited every time I play. And it doesn't matter if it's a huge venue or a small club. Every time I play a saxophone, I feel really fortunate and I just love it. So I think I've never gotten bored with music at all, but I have had times in my career where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take like a month or two off from gigs so I can focus on writing some new material, maybe working on and practicing some things that I want to. Because that's another thing, like when you're young and say you're in, music school, going to college, once you graduate, and if you're fortunate enough to have a busy career, it's not like you have that 8 hours a day to go in the practice room and shed stuff and work on new things because you're on a plane, you're doing a sound check, you're doing an interview. I have two TV shows tomorrow, and that ends up being a full day, even though it's not technically a gig. So these are all things that, if you're fortunate enough to have them happen, you don't really know until you know. Like you have to really budget time to do these things. So most of January, I kind of took off to work on some new songs and some new material for recording. And I think then it's impossible to get bored if you budget your time that way. Because if you only do gigs and you don't budget your time for some friends, some family, some shedding some stuff, some writing some new stuff, then the days just kind of keep going into each other, and before you know it, the year has gone by, and you might have like played a bunch of fun gigs, but then you haven't worked on some other stuff you wanted to.
So it sounds like it's all about balance, which is, it's a great answer that, you just said, like, I just took a month off and I'm sure now you feel refreshed and ready to go. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about John Coltrane, if that's okay.
Sure.
So there are certain aspects when I hear you play that there are very few sax players that I can think of who just take that inspiration, which is such a hard thing to do. It's not just the notes they play, but the way they play it. And would you say that John Coltrane has been a big influence on you over the years?
Oh, definitely. And not only do I, love John Coltrane's music and what he played and all that, but I think in like a much larger sense, it's the spiritualness and the connectiveness and, just kind of feeling like there's something way bigger than just, notes. And it's really, really powerful. And I am very fortunate that I got to play a bit with his longtime drummer, Elvin Jones, and I got to play on a couple occasions with McCoy Tyner. So on some level, I feel like a little bit of that has seeped in with me. And at Birdland, I got to hang out and meet Ravi Coltrane. The last time I played, he came out. And so just everyone in that world has been so nice because obviously John Coltrane's music, is so iconic, but it really, I've had students and other friends like memorize a solo and they're like, "Oh, Frank, check this out." And it's like, well, that's cool. And the notes are there. But it really, I think, if you're going to talk about John Coltrane, it isn't the notes, it's the spiritual vibes and what it means and how it transcends things. So
Well, that's the thing. So many people can play the ideas, but the way you play with the expressiveness is what is so impressing. And so many sax players, musicians try to go for that and just fail trying. So
well,
when you say,
I appreciate you saying that because that's a big compliment. So
well,
thank you.
that's the thing. I mean, when we talk about the word, the spiritual side of things, the connectedness, are these things that you think about before you play a concert? Whether it's there's something bigger than us, that it's our responsibility to push this music and, move people. Like, is it those type of thoughts, or is it something else you can maybe describe? Because this is a big mystery of the part where people try to get to play and they can't get to there because they're missing that element, the spirit.
No, that's another great point. I had when I was 16 my finger cut off and I almost died and just from losing so much blood. And I kind of just said to myself, if I am fortunate enough after some of these surgeries to get my finger back and working again, and if I'm lucky enough to move forward with music, because my mom did not want me to go into music because she's like, you need to do something where there's a steady paycheck,
Right.
and everyone told me there's no way you can make a living in music. So I was really discouraged by a lot of people around me. But other people, like my high school band director, Dick Robertson, he's like, "Oh, Frank, you're gonna have no problem." And so other people were like super encouraging, but other people that I cared about a lot were not encouraging. And I would say it was partially just having a horrible injury and near death experience. It just made me say, if I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough that I'm going to be able to like, be in one piece and have a proper shot at music, I'm going to give it 100%. And I've just always felt that it wasn't about the notes. It's about like, I mean, sometimes I'll be playing and my hair will get tingly and I'll just feel like there's a bunch of stuff around me that is not of this world. And I don't
Yeah.
even know how to better describe it, but I just feel it. So,
No, I understand what you're saying, and especially about the appreciation, because I've actually had some physical issues myself over the years. I had a very big neck surgery, that sort of thing. I understand what you're saying, and then there's a deep appreciation. Plus, I got hit by a car 2 years ago, so that was crazy as well. That was after my surgery. So there are these things that just knock us on our asses. But
yep.
interestingly enough, it's we just want to play still after that. We want to live, obviously, but the music is so important. So I definitely understand what you're saying, and that's a great answer. Now, you have to be self-aware at a young age to know you're going to go into music. Like you said, your high school band director was super supportive of what you were doing. But did you have like a light switch go off where you say, I'm going for it? Like in high school, like when did things start to come together in terms of thinking about it as a career?
Uh, I would say when I was maybe like 13 or 14, I was already playing pretty regularly. I was sitting in with Von Freeman regularly. Andy's Jazz Club had already started hiring me. Like I was doing like Tuesdays and stuff, a couple like coffee houses, one in Evanston by Northwestern. So I was
So you know Julian Smith, I'm assuming, and
yeah, Julian plays with me all the time, and I
yeah.
love Julian. He's my friend. He played on I did an album live from Birdland about a year or two ago, and Julian played bass, and Randy Ingram played piano, and Mike Clark played drums. So they're my good friends. And Julian's been in New York now for a while, doing great. But the amount of people that kind of lived in Chicagoland that don't anymore is kind of interesting and huge, in and of itself. But yeah, I would definitely say I was already able to not make a living, but like, I was making in the early 90s, I was making a few $100s a week, which probably translated to today's money, is probably like at least $1,000, $1,200 a week. So, as a 13 or 14-year-old. So I just felt confident that, I definitely needed to earn a living, no doubt, but I just knew it would work out.
No,
So,
that's such a privileged position to be in, to make that money when you're so young and just, that's really
that's what
cool.
my mom was making almost no money. My dad was nowhere to be found. So my mom was like very concerned about money, like keeping lights on and stuff. And I was just like, hey, listen, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. So I would come home from playing and everyone would pay cash back then. So I'd have a few $100 like on my dresser. I'd come back from school. There'd be like $10.
You were
And
you
I
so you
thought,
were supporting your family in a sense. Your mother, your mother.
definitely my mom and my brother for a couple years without question. And
And you're
I didn't mind
13.
or easily. And that's where I also, when my mom was so adamant about me, when I was offered several full music scholarships, Berkeley, USC, DePaul. And my mom was like, oh, that'd be great if you could go to DePaul so you can still be in Chicago. And then maybe instead of the music stuff, you can go to the law school.
No, yeah, law school.
I'm like, well, I think that's cool, but it's a music scholarship because I want to play music. My mom is like, no, don't waste your time with that. So it is just funny in hindsight. But at the time, those were some serious conversations. So especially if my mom is upset, heads are gonna roll, so to speak.
Well,
So,
that what
but
I really appreciate, Frank, that how open you're being with me, because a lot of jazz musicians don't want to let their guard down. I've interviewed so many people, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But we're all in this world together, and we all go through things and struggle. It's not life is not peaches and cream. That's a new way I think
no,
about it. It's a mess.
it's funny that you mentioned that because I've been on some interviews with people that are my friends that I've been playing with for years, and their answers are so calculated. It's nowhere near the type of answer they would give if we were having a couple drinks after a concert or something. So I just know, with me personally, I think pretty much, the way I'm on stage, the way I am right now, the way I'm just like hanging at a friend's birthday party, I'm pretty much the same. And I also like to just kind of always say from my heart what I truly believe because I feel like maybe somebody's watching this interview and it can help them in some way. Maybe somebody watches something and disagrees. All that's fine. But if I'm not being 100% myself and not giving an answer from the heart, then there's no way I'm going to be saying something that's going to resonate with somebody, I feel, and maybe in a helpful way. So, but these are all things that I think people go through. If you want to be an artist of any type, whether visual artist, if you want to go into making films, if you want to be a musician, you're going to have family, friends, all types of people either encouraging you, maybe when they shouldn't, or
You ever
maybe
watch Woody Allen movies ever?
oh, totally.
Yeah. He's like, Woody Allen interview, he says, we're all gonna leave this earth. And it's like every 100 years, a new set of people comes in, and it's like, despite this, why do we want to go on living to create the art? We just love it. It makes it worthwhile, that fact. And this it's crazy to think about.
I hope what we're talking about in our music and everything makes the world a better place.
Definitely.
Because again, I just feel like if we're not doing stuff to make the world a better place, then kind of like, what are we doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We should volunteer and try to help stuff. I've been volunteering at Off the Street Club for over 20 years, doing a after work school program, and I just can't do it as much anymore. I'm happy I'm going to see everybody this week, but then in talking with them, I'm trying to get some people to kind of fill in for me and keep that going. So we have to pass the torch. So like when you just said, like every 100 years, new group of people, the people like Louis Belson, Tony Bennett, all those people, as a young person, started passing my name around, started hiring me. It helped me out a lot financially. It helped me out a lot just like meeting other people to perform with. And so I hope now that I'm getting a little older, I'm in a position to do that on some level. And I hope 30 years from now, I'll be able to do it even more so. But everyone kind of has to help each other. Otherwise, I just feel like, what's the point? And
You're right.
I do really feel like these types of conversations are super important because I feel like a generation or two, like older, like people that are now no longer with us, like I mentioned Von Freeman, mentioned Tony Bennett, mentioned Louis Belson, mentioned Elvin Jones, all those people were so giving and caring. And then it seemed like people, like when I was, going to college, people, around me, they weren't like passing gigs around. It was people that were 20 or 30 or 40 years older than me. They were going like, hey, Frank, can you sub for me for this? And I noticed like I was like giving other saxophone players gigs, like saying, hey, this is like a private party type gig. I'm playing at the Green Mill with my band. I can't do it. Would you like to do it? Never once did they like reciprocate back to me. And I didn't think about it at the time, but a few older musicians were kind of like, if you're giving a bunch of gigs to somebody and they're not reciprocating back or being thoughtful, is that somebody that you really want to keep, doing stuff with?
This is so important for you to talk about. Very few people, there's only one other person I've talked about this on the podcast with. We need to help each other. And then I don't know what it is, maybe they're just not aware of and that level that we need to help each other. Maybe, or I don't know. I wouldn't say it's selfish or, I just think they just don't think about it or something. Ignorance is bliss, I guess, right?
Well, that's a good way to put it. And I think there is a lot of that. Sometimes, unfortunately, people can be really nice to you, like when you're offering them things. But then as soon as you stop, they act not as friendly. And I actually said to somebody the other day, and I guess I would call it like a very mild argument. And this is a person I have hired over the years for, I would say, at least 500 gigs. And if you figure like maybe 50 to 100 a year for, a decade. So, and then the person was kind of being salty towards me and wanting more money for one particular gig. And I'm just like, listen, this is what it pays. And there's flights involved, there's hotels involved. And so I know that they see, wow, there's hundreds of people that each paid $50 to get in. But then you look at it like there's so much expenses that go into it. And this is something that the average person maybe doesn't take into.
They have no idea what goes into this process that's what the pay is. I mean, and you're nice enough to, hopefully you explain. I mean, I would have flipped out. I would have just been like, take a hike. So
I've had to do that in a couple situations over the years when somebody was very aggressive. That's one thing I just won't deal with because I like to really like the people that I'm performing with. Because I know some musicians, they could be like, oh, so and so isn't a nice person, but they're a wonderful player. I just have never been, of that attitude. I want someone who's a really cool person and a really great player.
Can I
And
ask
I
you a
don't,
question?
sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just I don't want to. If Have you ever admired someone's playing and to the point like, so I'm talking like really like you're almost a fan of theirs and then hired them before, but then your perception of who they are as a person completely changed once you got to know them personally?
Only a couple times, and one person in
You don't have
particular.
to name them. I'm just curious.
It's this one person out of respect to him because I've only done a couple things with him, and he is a really nice person and he's a really great player, but he has such a horrible drug and alcohol problem. He kept it under wraps kind of for a couple gigs we did, and I'm like, what a great guy, great player, all's good. Then about maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, we had another set of gigs and he just didn't act the same. And then the next day he was like nowhere to be found. He was just passed out. He had gone through like 3 or 4 bottles of vodka, just a person that needs help and has been in and out of all types of rehab stuff. And we had a whole kind of tour of Europe scheduled that ended up basically getting canceled. So in that case, I feel horrible, A, because this person needs a lot of help.
Right.
B, um, I can tell is a truly good person, but just can't keep it together. And then C, if a tour gets canceled after spending all this time and energy to book it, you have other people involved that you play with, other musicians, you have concert promoters, you have your manager, you have booking agents, you have all these people. So it's letting all those people down as well, costing time, energy, money, and also, people wanting to make music and having it on the books and on their schedule. So it was at that moment that I just realized this is a really great guy, and I'd be happy at some point down the road to go hang out with them and all that stuff. So no bad vibes. But if are around people like that, they're just going to cause so many problems. And
Yeah.
then it hurts your reputation because they don't say so and so canceled, they say Frank Catalano canceled or whatever. And it's like, to me, even when I've had broken ankles, all this other stuff, I never cancel gigs because it's like the show must go on. So when there's other people that have that type of um ability to kind of just be like a train wreck, I guess I'd say, even if I can tell they're kind people and they're not trying to cause harm, they do cause harm. So I definitely try to stay away from those types of people. And you don't really know until you know. I didn't realize it was as bad as it was with this person. And then when I start kind of getting a similar vibe off of other people, that's usually when I have to just say, even if they're a great player and they're nice, you can kind of be like, okay, let's play together in the near future. And sometimes they'll get mad. They'll be like, hey, Frank, I thought the gig went well. Why are you hiring this other person? And only one time did I go in to explain it, but I like to
Like you
have
mean
some.
like you actually told them the truth about what, like
Yeah.
you didn't mix words.
Yeah. And I just said, you obviously just have a lot of, drug issues going on. And I'm just like, you were one way at the beginning of the gig, and then you changed during the break to the second set, and then you were a whole different player. And I'm like, I mean, we recorded it, so you can even tell your style of playing is different and all this. And this particular dude, instead of getting mad, he just kind of teared up and gave me a hug and just left.
Wow.
And so he knew I wasn't, making this up. And then I would say for about I would maybe once or twice a year, I would just send him a text message and check in, and usually it got ignored. And then maybe a couple years later, I sent him one. He's like, "Oh, Frank, hey, yeah, I'd really like to do some playing together." So I hired him for a couple things. Was great. I could still tell that there was some issues, but I at least feel like there was good vibes between us. But some people, that's an issue. And I would say that's the only time when I've had to like not hire somebody that I would really like to. In other cases, if some people aren't understanding of the financial thing, like they just want too much money, I respect that, but it just means then that I can't hire them. One time, I think this person in particular was trying to just be a slick negotiator in their mind, and then they're just like, "Oh, but I can't do it for this because they have all this going on," and I'm just like, "Oh, well, then I'm sorry," you know. And so then it was like 2 days later, they're like, "Well, Frank, yeah, I was thinking about it, and I just have so much fun playing with your band, so I'm happy to accept your offer." And I'm like, "Sorry, bro, but I already hired somebody else because like I had to get like work permits in and all." And you should have then heard the radio silence.
Yeah, this is like being a good business person. This is entrepreneurial skills. This is about, we're talking about morals,
Yep.
ethics, whatever you want to, whatever you want to call it.
And then
And
the other thing, not to interrupt, but
no, no, please,
with
please.
this person in particular, and I think this is good just as a business sense, this other person was acting as if it was their band and they were calling the shots. And I had to kind of put this person in their place because it was like, it's my band. And the person that's calling the shots ultimately are the festival promoters or the club owners because they're kind of deciding who comes in.
Right. Um,
So I'm not actually the head honcho, even if it is my band. But if let's say you're, playing as a sideman, your name isn't mentioned. It's not like, Frank Catalano and so co-leading. You kind of have to just say, yeah, I'd love to do these, or geez, I guess I can't. But you can't wait a few days and then come back as if, the offer was just waiting for you to. I mean, it just doesn't work like that, is my
no,
point.
I've had similar situations happen. And even another thing too, where you hire a musician and they agree to it, but then they get offered something better and just leave you hanging, which is,
Yep.
like, listen, it's fine. Like, I get it. We all have to make a living, but find someone else who can do the job and cover me. Like, just
Yep.
you, that way they take the pressure off you. They don't even think about that sometimes.
I've had a few situations where, it just couldn't be helped, whether they got offered a really like a gig they couldn't turn down, or they had a family issue or something. But if someone says, "Hey, Frank, this is going on. I know that, the gigs are coming up quick. I did talk to these two people that are available that are both great. That could cover for me. You might have somebody else in mind." But I think it's how somebody handles it. Like if they go about it in a caring, thoughtful way, then it's like I've had people do that, and then I'm totally not bothered by it, and I'm happy to hire them again. But when it is somebody that just waits around and they're like, "Oh yeah, Frank, I'm good for these," it's like, well, when we last discussed this, you weren't, and we weren't even like in the realm of agreement. So that's where I think ego comes into play. And I would just say the best sidemen that I've ever worked with are usually very well known in their own right. Like people know who they are. They have a good reputation. They kick butt and nail everything and are amazing players. And there's no need for them to have an ego or an attitude. It's because they're so good. Everyone loves them. Everyone respects them. There's nothing that they need to do. If they can't
It's
make,
interesting you say that because it's like whenever you say John Coltrane Quartet, you can't think about John Coltrane Quartet without automatically thinking about those other players with them.
yep.
And it sounds to me like the way you talk about those players in that sense is a very similar type of relationship, camaraderie, mutual respect, professional. And but I don't know. I wish I had the answer. I think you and I think very similarly about this stuff, but I don't. It seems to be like happening more often than people want to talk about or think. Like this is happening all the time to musicians. This stuff.
Oh yeah, and they really don't teach this in any type of music school. You mean they might teach you how to play the right notes. They might have a wonderful theory class. Even finding like a music business class. I know a few colleges, they offer a music business degree. Some have actually gotten rid of that degree. They maybe offer a class, but they really need to, I think, offer some classes on just like how people should interact. Like meaning like it isn't just about I'm getting on stage and playing. it's like you at any given time, you have all the people in the audience, you have all the people that work at the venue, you have the managers, you have the booking agents, you have the owners, you have the people you're sharing the stage with. And then a farther reaching end, you have the person that, let you on the airplane. You
Yeah,
have
it's like this is basic stuff how to interact with people and they don't even know. It's like they've thrown this stuff away completely. Like I mean, it's crazy.
and
This
we
stuff.
all have to work together and be cool with each other because it could be the guy in the Uber that, doesn't get you to the thing on time because he took a wrong turn. And that happened to me once. And then how do you deal with it? And then, so all these things are just, part of making sure you as an artist are giving the best performance that you can. And one thing too, when I was younger, I used to run late a little bit, and I feel bad because there was a couple times where I had close calls or, barely made it on time. And that's something then, you can maybe get away with it when you're a teenager or something. But as an adult, you cannot, if you say, hey, I'm going to do this gig and it starts at noon, be there at 11:30 ready to go.
Yeah, I think there's a psychological component that happens to it. So for instance, if you offer someone a gig, not the best paying gig, but like let's say it's a restaurant or something like that, and the call time is 12, like maybe they like show up like 5 minutes before because they're pissed to be doing that gig
Yep.
and they're not going to treat it the way they would treat a gig. Like let's say they got a gig at the Blue Note or something, or not that they just don't treat it with that same respect. So they say to themselves, "I'm going to leave exactly when Waze says I'm going to be there 15 minutes before," and then they're there 5 minutes before.
And it's funny you mention that because this was a while back. I've had an alcohol endorsement, thankfully, for I would say over 10 years now. The companies have changed, but I've always been in one for the last decade, which has been a really unique, fun situation. A lot of different gigs come about it. I get put in a lot of different situations from it. Financially, it's a big help. So it's been great, I think, on all levels. But what I will say is some of these concerts they're not maybe going to be at the top end jazz club. They might be at a restaurant or, something. And now that doesn't mean it's not going to be the best gig ever because sometimes it's like 500 really awesome people waiting to hear your music and have a drink and have some fun, and it's just the best ever. But one person in particular, I remember getting there like right when it was downbeat time. And then they're looking for a place to store all their stuff. And now we're starting late because yeah, they got there in time technically, but then it's like they have all, these cases and all these, things. It happened to be a drummer. So it wasn't great.
I
And
think they're
then
just bitter, and they're bitter that they're not the band leader. I'm not a psychologist, but if I had to guess, I think it has something to do with that. I don't know.
you're 100% right. And my wife and I have talked about this a little bit because on this particular occasion, it was important. Everyone was getting paid very well,
Hmm.
much better than even the top jazz clubs.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you would have thought it wouldn't be a money thing because you would think they'd be happy
Hmm.
because, okay, cool. It's not a private party, meaning, anyone can come in. I understand private parties sometimes people would get bitter at because it's like, okay, I'm not really, presenting my art to the public. I've heard a bunch of different things. I just think anytime, you can go make music and be paid for it, you're in a very, very fortunate position.
No,
But to have
definitely.
somebody basically tell me, as he did, well, Frank, this gig isn't that important. And it was coming from something else, and I didn't think you'd mind.
He
And
said
I'm
that.
just, he said just like that. And I said, well, first off, who is it like to decide what's important or not? It's certainly not for you to decide.
Right.
You're the person playing drums with me. And I'm like, you don't get it. There was like some really, really high end people in the audience that put together big festivals and all this other stuff. And so when someone says something isn't important, that just blows my mind because you never know. I can actually say the gig that got me my first record deal, there was very few people there. It was, snowing and a crappy night out. I was a teenager. I was sitting in with Charles Erlingham and B3 organ player for the very first time. That was maybe the most important gig of my life in some ways, because as I'm thinking about it, 500 plus gigs with Charles Erling came about, which also led to Jimmy Smith and Dr. Lonnie Smith and all these other people. It led to my first record deal. Like, if you remove that one gig from my career, not that I wouldn't have still had a good career, but so many awesome things came out of that one night. But now about it. If I would have thought it's not really hardly paying anything and it's snowing and there's nobody here, it's not that important anyway.
Yeah.
That would have been the worst thing ever. I just luckily never think that way. But when somebody said, oh, this is an important gig anyway, wow, did it just bug me. And the fact then they said they were coming from something else. So it also let me know they took another gig that was too close to the gig that they had already accepted with me. That is the worst you can do. I had this happen with a recording session recently with a very famous guitar player, and I got a little salty about it because we were co-leading the session. I never met the bass player before, a good player, but he was telling me how he was just coming from some other thing and the thing he did last night and how wiped he is. And I'm thinking, what an idiot, because he's letting me know he's beat for this recording session. That is somewhat of a big to do. Most people, instead of playing, maybe a gig the night before that didn't pay that great, maybe would have been like, you know what, I better get some rest so I can be at 110% for my recording next day. He didn't take that attitude about it. Instead, he decided to tell me about all these other gigs he's doing and how busy he is and how beat he is, and how he basically was saying he wasn't playing as good as he would like at the recording because of all these other gigs he took. So I'm going like, in my mind, I'm just thinking like, this is just bad business on his end. Not a smart thing to say to me. If he wanted to apologize because he wasn't playing at the level I was hoping, I guess that would be nice. But really, at a certain point, when you're paying somebody fairly, which he was getting paid very fairly, and we had agreed on a dollar amount ahead of time, and I didn't use one of my regular players because the guitar player had vouched for this guy, it kind of ruined the whole thing, or at least to an extent. So
then that's these are the real stories that people need to hear. And Frank, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today, and I hope we can do it again.
I really appreciate it, Abe. Anytime, just let me know.